In this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on Fujifilm's XF23mm f1.4. Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. In this review, I'll be offering my experience with the Fujinon XF23mm f1.4R LMWR, contrasting it with the old lens and discussing which lens I think might be right for you. Before we get going though, I want to apologize a little bit for my absence on YouTube. So it's been a fun way to spend the pandemic, but as work has sort of ramped up pretty quickly here in Korea, my clients have started to take priority, and unfortunately that means that YouTube has had to take a little bit of a back seat, as I just really haven't had time to make the videos. But now that I'm back into a little bit of a rhythm with my client work, I feel like I can start, slowly adding bits and pieces back into my life, and one of those things is this channel. So while I can't really promise as to the frequency of these videos going forward, I do have a long list of things that I want to film, and so I'll be getting those done and uploading them as soon as I can. So to those who've commented during my absence, I really appreciate your time, and I will be trying to get back to all of those as soon as I can. But on with today's video. And so we're going to talk about this gem of a lens, and I've had it for about 4 months now, and I've done a couple of dozen family sessions, quite a few corporate events, and plenty of personal work using it. So it's definitely got quite a bit of use, and it is my second most used focal length after the 33mm f1.4, especially when it comes to corporate events. So definitely been coming out of the bag quite a bit. And now that I've finally got the time to sort of offer you my thoughts, I hope that I can answer a few of the questions people have had regarding it in the comments. So let's get into it. So Fujifilm's XF23mm f1.4R it's still an excellent lens, but it is getting a little long in the tooth. Now, it was designed for the goals of the original X series cameras, and even though it has really great image quality, it does lack in a few areas that maybe Fujifilm's current users are wanting. And so when the updated lens was announced, I jumped on the chance to replace my old beaten up 23mm with the new one. So this new 23mm f1.4 basically seeks to address a few of the shortcomings, quote-unquote shortcomings, that the first lens had. So weather sealing, autofocus, and chromatic aberration issues. And we'll get into those in detail over the course of the video, but for now, let's just say it's a pretty big difference from the original lens. Now, I'll be discussing this from a photographer's perspective, but I am aware that some people will want to shoot video using it since the updated autofocus is in there. But I'm in no way an authority on video, so for the next sections of the video, I'm going to swap out the 23mm that I'm currently filming on and film the rest of the video on this, so you can make a few sort of basic judgments for yourself about how the lens might perform. Okay, so here we are filming on the 23mm. Now, first up, let's chat a little bit about build quality. So this lens fits nicely into that new trio of primes from Fujifilm, and so just like the other two, the 18 and the 33mm, this lens is exceptionally well built, and it feels really, really good in the hand, as we expect from Fujifilm's lenses. Now, it's a little bit longer, thinner, and heavier than its predecessor, but not by any sort of significant amount, and I haven't really noticed a difference while carrying it around. Now, it is weather sealed though, and that's a really nice little peace of mind for when you're out in the field and maybe the weather turns a bit sour like our current monsoon season. So one of the things that I did love about the original 23mm f1.4 when it was released was the manual focus clutch, this guy. At the time, I was shooting a lot of film and manual focusing quite a bit, so it was something that I really appreciated, especially because, at that time, like the XT1, the autofocus wasn't great, shall we say, but Fujifilm have worked really hard, and the autofocus has progressed quite a bit, so I've come to rely on it quite a bit and haven't used the manual focus clutch in years now. So I don't really mind only having the focus by wire system in the new lens, but your mileage may vary on that. So before we get into the good stuff, let's chat a little bit about technical image quality. Now, if I had to sum up the image quality of this lens in a single word, I would say it's excellent. But, this is a review and we can't just leave it there. So much like the other two lenses in this new generation of primes, the 23mm f1.4R LMWR is sharp. It's ridiculously sharp. So if you're a fan of fine details, you really don't need to look any further. It outdoes both of Fujifilm's previous 23mm lenses in leaps and bounds. Now, wide open, it produces much better detail from corner to corner than either of those two 23mm lenses, and it doesn't suffer from that softness when focusing close like the XF 23mm f2 did. As you can see from these side-by-side images, the center of the image is quite a bit better than the old 23mm f1.4, and the corners are absolutely miles ahead when it comes to the amount of detail rendered. As we stop down to f2.8 or f4 though, you'd be hard-pressed to see a difference between this and either of the older lenses in real-world applications. So most of the improvements are going to be seen when pixel peeping and using the lens wide open. So if that's something that's important to you, maybe looking at the new lens is something that's worth doing. The 23mm has been really well corrected for color fringing, and it rarely shows up even in the most extreme of high contrast areas. So this is certainly a benefit for those of us looking to work in tough light and keep a clean and detailed images. But the biggest improvement in terms of color fringing can be seen in the longitudinal chromatic aberrations. Now, that's the kind that form around your plane of focus, in front of and behind it, and they show up as sort of green and purple fringing in those areas. And you can really see a big difference between the old lens and this one here. And it doesn't show up in every situation, but you can definitely notice in the bokeh of the older lens that it shows up quite a bit more prominently. And chroma was never really a problem with the old lens, but it is a little bit better in the new lens. Now, much like that old lens, there's still a little bit to be seen when you use it wide open, but stopping down to f2 completely removes it. And so overall, there's nothing really to complain about there. It does a really good job. So if you're looking to do some maybe astrophotography or use it wide open for night scenes, you really shouldn't see any problems once you stop down to about f2. And one final thing to note is that the older lens was actually completely corrected for distortion optically, so using the glass in the lens. But the new lens does apply some software corrections to deal with quite a bit of barrel distortion. So as you can see here, if we switch off that distortion correction, the image begins to bulge quite a bit. And so you likely won't even notice this if you're working with software like Lightroom or Capture One, where those corrections that Fujifilm has provided are applied automatically. So as you've hopefully seen, this lens performs a lot like the new 23mm and 18mm lenses. They're all sharp, contrasty, and very well corrected. And while this might seem a little bit too maybe clinical for some people, there are still some creative uses that we can find for these lenses. Now, flare is exceptionally well controlled in this lens, and you'll see it hold contrast even in really harsh backlight. You know, in scenes like this one, I can confidently know that I'll hold good detail and contrast in those subjects, even as the background, which is a few stops over, begins to really blow out. At certain angles, you can still get a little bit of ghosting to come through the frame, and that's nothing that, if you don't like it, slightly changing the composition won't fix. But what you do get from this new formula, though, is the same big Sunstars that you get from the 18mm and the 33mm. So stopping down to f2 or 2.8, the stars begin to form, and then once you stop down to f6, you'll start to see these really big Sunstars. So, happy days if you're a fan of Sunstars. The bokeh produced by this lens is, in most situations, just fine. It's generally smooth, and it helps the subject stand out from the background or the foreground without drawing too much attention to itself. And that's pretty much what most of us need from our bokeh. But if we want to compare it to its older sibling, we can see that the new lens tends to produce a little bit more of a jittery effect in the out of focus areas. And this really only happens when there's a lot of contrast between different areas in the background. And to be honest, if I wasn't trying to find differences in these lenses, I really wouldn't have even noticed it for my own work. But if you do shoot a lot of backlit foliage, you might start to see a bit of a difference that's meaningful for you. And if you look really closely, you might actually start to see those little bits of chromatic aberration in the old lens that aren't really present in the new lens. The full name of this lens is the Fujinon XF 23mm f1.4R LMWR. Now, the LM in there means that it makes use of Fujifilm's linear motors for extremely fast autofocus in both continuous and single modes. So this might be the area where you see, I guess, the biggest leap forward when compared to the original XF 23mm, because that lens used the DC coreless motors, and while it was plenty fast enough in single focus, it wasn't always accurate in continuous focus, and it also made quite a bit of noise, which I know annoyed some people, and comparatively it took a little while to move back and forth. Now, the linear motors in the new lens they're silent and fast, and when it comes to single autofocus, it can often be hard to notice whether the camera has even focused if you're not sweeping from near to far, because it just sort of snaps into focus and it's ready to shoot. So really, really fast. Now, in continuous focus, I've found it to be extremely accurate, and it tracks far, far better than the old lens did. Now, the caveat to this point is that you really need to set up your tracking for the type of subject that you're going to be shooting. And you can see my 33mm f1.4 review for my full rant on Fujifilm's autofocus system. We won't do that again here, but that point aside, this lens is easily on par with the best of Fujifilm's linear motor lenses, so you can rest assured know that you're going to get really, really good autofocus out of this. Now, right now I'm also filming on AFC with the face detect turned on to give you an idea of sort of how it performs on the X-T4. Now, I guess it's probably performing a lot like the 33mm f1.4 that I normally film on, but I won't know until I've seen this footage. Another thing that I noticed while using this lens is that it focuses much, much faster and more accurately in backlit situations than the old lens did. Now, the older lens would struggle quite a bit in harsh backlight, and sometimes it would just completely miss focus, but this lens just doesn't miss a beat. The moment you press the shutter down, it just snips into focus and you're ready to go. So, one final point worth mentioning though is, like I found with the 33mm f1.4, this lens focuses a lot more reliably when you're focusing on distant subjects than the old lens did. So whereas with the old lens you might have to take quite a few shots of a distant subject just to make sure that one of them was in focus, I found that with this one you can just trust that even distant subjects are going to be really, really well in focus. Overall, the 23mm has improved significantly in all technical metrics. It's better built, it does a better job of resolving detail, it does a better job of keeping aberrations at bay, and a better job of focusing in all situations. And whether that difference is enough for you to, warrant choosing one over the other, only really you can say that. But I hope that the comparisons that I've made here have been helpful for you in trying to make that decision. Now, honestly, I was fine with the old 23mm f1.4 for most of my work, but the new lens has opened up, quite a few possibilities for me. Now, one of those is shooting into backlight. I don't have to be so careful anymore because I know that I'm going to retain detail and I won't have to worry about losing contrast to extreme flare. Now, it's also much easier to focus on those backlit subjects, even when tracking in AFC. Now, speaking of AFC, there's also no more sort of reviewing several photos to ensure that the one moment I caught during a burst was actually in focus. So, if I've got a family walking towards me, I no longer have to, quickly go back through as I'm going to a different location and just quickly check that I did get the peak moment in focus, which I did quite often with the older lens. So for family sessions, corporate events, or couple shoots, I can just sort of trust this new lens in every situation and at every aperture setting. So for me, this was well and truly worth the upgrade. If you don't need the extra autofocus speed or the extra detail when you're working wide open, it might be worth looking into the second-hand market for a really good deal on the old 23mm f1.4. I can imagine quite a few people, like myself, will be parting ways with their old lens. Now, I hope that you've enjoyed this review and got what you came for. If you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more videos like these. We'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers!